Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Autonomous Health Podcast. I'm your host, Anmol Madan, and with me today is Bagirathi Narayanan, the Chief Architect of Teladoc Health. Bagirathi, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Anmol.
We usually start by having people talk about their background and their journey, and introducing kind of what brought them to their current role. So, do you want to take a minute and tell us like your journey as you stepped into this current position, and what's your what brought you here?
Sure, it may go beyond a minute, especially the last part of the question.
Yeah, we
I
have
grew
time. We have time. So,
okay. I grew up in a small town in southern part of India called Trichy. Got introduced to computer science in my high school, fell in love with it, and been in tech since then. And from that point onwards, I've been progressively moving from, starting my career as a developer, a database developer, and a software programmer to leading some of these large scale digital transformation in Fortune 50 companies, mainly in BFSI industry for companies like Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, MetLife, and so on. Life was great in these last 2 decades. Most of my roles involved innovating with emerging technologies, and I would say bringing in emerging technologies with the goal of maximizing business value. As you probably can imagine, these companies are some of the largest consumers of technology. So as a technologist, you are living the dream. You get to experiment with so many different technologies, like, what's my next shiny toy that I can play with? So it was great until a point where I encountered a personal health adversity and I was forced to go on a disability for some time. And that brought me closer to healthcare industry, and that turned me into a healthcare industry aspirant. And usually when people go through these health adversities, that's when you ask questions like why and why me.
yeah,
For me, that was the point when a mantra that my dad used to, always say came to me, right? The Sarve Jana Sukhino Bhavantu, which is roughly translated as may all be well. He used to say it all the time when I was little, but at that time, it didn't sink in. But when I was going through this adversity, this mantra became my life mantra. And I seriously started contemplating moving to healthcare industry to see how I can provide my services, like all the technology skill sets that I've learned and used at scale in these companies to do something meaningful and fulfilling in the healthcare industry. So I joined Teladoc with the vision of in architecting the future of digital health and helping Teladoc live its vision and fulfill its mission of empowering all people everywhere live their healthiest lives. I joined the company in Feb of 2022. That summer, my dad passed away. And the next summer, right after my dad's annual ceremony, my mom passed away. So for me, these last 2 years of grief and loss has, I should say, only further bolstered my conviction. I'm sharing this story because, this is my way of, imploring technology entrepreneurs like yourself and the technology audiences, that listening to your podcast today, to tell them that there's so much to be done in the healthcare industry for technologists like ours, right? There's so much to be explored, so many problems and challenges to be solved for. um, and that's what brought me here. And I'm hoping there'll be more people joining the tribe and you know uh,
yeah,
doing something impactful and meaningful with technology.
yeah. And so, in what I'm hearing you say is, a long, obviously successful tenure in finance at the edge of sort of fintech, and realizing the importance that healthcare plays in our lives made you wanted to be part of it, and
Yeah.
Teladoc felt like the right opportunity for that. And Bhagit, how would you compare those two industries? When you think of culturally, having spent, it sounds like, multiple decades now in finance and the large organizations there versus healthcare, are there parallels? Are there things that are culturally different inside these organizations? Like, how would you compare and contrast them?
Well, a lot of parallels and a lot of dissimilarities as well. Parallels from the perspective of, both are regulated industry, but the type of regulation is very different. Healthcare data is very
Hmm.
personal, right? Beyond regulation, there is an added responsibility to be hypersensitive to the data that we are dealing with in the healthcare space, right? Which is why it's even more regulated, and which is why, in a way, I would say the digital transformation took so many years in the healthcare industry. From a scaling standpoint, um, similarities from a similarities perspective, technology is a technology, whatever industry you talk about. But what is the data this technology is consuming, how is the data distributed, how is the data consumed, is vastly different, not only because of regulation but also because of complexity of the ecosystem, right? The complexity of the ecosystem and the ecosystem players is hugely different in both, the BFSI industry and the healthcare industry. um, but there are a lot of learnings that healthcare industry can take from other industry, especially the BFSI industry, I would say, in how they approach the digital transformation, how they approached an emerging technology disruption like AI. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from
Give
those
an
industry
example,
approach.
Bhagirathi, that illustrates that.
Yeah. So, for instance, when there are a lot of, I would say, counterintuitive methods that these other industries used. When they used it at that time, it was considered counterintuitive, but now it's not. Like, for instance, the mobile first, cloud first. And how can you talk about cloud first in an industry like MetLife, for instance? They started their digital transformation journey, I think, 8, 9 years back. When they started that, the company was like what, close to about 150-year-old company. They had so many legacy tech debt. They had so many on-prem application. When people started talking about cloud first, it was considered very counterintuitive because you have a huge problem of tech debt. You have a huge problem of legacy modernization issue. You have all these monoliths that have been built in such a diversified tech stack. How can you think about cloud first and make economic sense out of it, right? It's going to be super expensive to think about cloud first. But when people started digging a little bit deeper into what that cloud first means, cloud first doesn't mean cloud only, right? It's about approaching it with cloud first mindset to uncover what are all those enablers that are not enablers today, that are kind of roadblocks for you to do the digital transformation, and then take a targeted approach to legacy modernization in those areas, addressing the legacy tech debts in those areas, addressing monoliths and breaking them down into microservices and container architectures in those areas will give you a better return and give you a more pragmatic approach, right? So, a cloud first approach gradually started making sense. Similarly, I would say here now we are in AI era. My In my opinion, we should approach this very similar to that cloud first. Start approaching this from an AI first mindset, right? It doesn't mean that you will be able to, accomplish that, but when you start with AI first mindset, you will be able to uncover, okay, what are the data gaps? What are the infrastructure gaps? What are the compute gaps that I have today? Or what are the people gaps skill gaps that I have today? So you will be able to take a much more targeted approach with that kind of a approach and mindset, which these large companies were able to do with the prior, digital transformation era with cloud and more.
It sets a segue into my next question, which is around, the role of an architect in healthcare companies. And I feel like, really good architects are the ones who are kind of forcing the company to change their thinking, because there's just often institutional inertia, right? Because large organizations may have thousands, tens of thousands of technical staff members in different roles, right? Engineers, product managers, data scientists, whatever. And so as an architect, you're kind of shaping, forcing the company to evolve while also not compromising on the things that have to happen for the company to exist and survive. Usually you're supporting hundreds, if not, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of revenue on the other side. So you can't just like switch everything off overnight, right? And so where do you think, as a seasoned veteran in this role, where do you think architect roles in healthcare organizations are misunderstood? Where do you think like people really understand the value of that role? Like, what advice would you have to people listening and saying how should they think of the architecture role itself? I want to go deeper into like the data platforms and the AI stuff you mentioned just a second, but as a person who understands this role really well, like how would you say this role is sort of well understood? Where is it not well understood? And what makes a successful architect? What makes that role successful inside any company?
So a typical stereotyping with architecture is, architecture is only technology focused or mainly technology focused. And looking at architecture from a solution architecture perspective, which is an important function of architecture, sure. But that is not the only function of architecture, right? Architects' responsibility is not just coming up with these data models and blueprints and solution sketches that's consumed by engineers to improve their productivity and delivery velocity, but it's much bigger than that. The consumers of an architecture function is not just technology teams and engineering teams. The enterprise part of the architecture is not, especially in healthcare industry, is not fully leveraged, understood, and utilized, right? Why I say that is, we'll speak about the data part later, when you
Yeah.
go to the data part of the question, but from an enterprise architecture standpoint, especially in the healthcare industry, with such a complex ecosystem, you need the architects to bring a holistic perspective of how all the puzzle pieces fit together, right? There needs to be an outside in view of what are my health consumers wanting, what are the products and services we are delivering, and how it caters to the market, to my health consumers. But there is also an inside out view of what capabilities are we building for the company as a whole, right? So what are, like say for instance in Teladoc, for a digital health company like Teladoc, what are the building blocks, capabilities that a digital health company like Teladoc should be building and providing, and how these capabilities should come together? Like, be it, it's not just the care delivery functions and capabilities, but it's also things like your eligibility, your claims, right? And your customer service. All of these should come together in a harmonious way. And these capabilities, you should know how they amplify one another and how they depend on one another. And when it comes to investment, what are the capabilities that we should be investing in so that we maximize the business outcome and value for the company, and maximize the health outcome, improve the health outcome for our health consumers. So a broader business modeling and architecture design for the enterprise in itself, that is thoroughly underutilized, in my opinion.
Yeah, and so that's just, and is that a function of just like healthcare companies usually, and I'll put the digital health or the new age healthcare companies aside, but you look at the vast majority of traditional healthcare companies, they're not technology companies, right, by
Yeah.
definition, and so they haven't had to think about tech debt or infrastructure scaling or some of these other challenges that other businesses have had to. And is it a cultural issue, or like, is that what's kind of underpinning it, perhaps?
One of the contributing factors is cultural issue, because they are not used to functioning as these large technology consumers like other industry. Digital
Right.
transformation itself is new. But off late, I'm seeing more and more of these conventional, brick and mortar healthcare companies, realizing the need for architecture. They are, I see more and more emphasis on enterprise architecture. So it's a culture aspect of it, but it's also It's traditionally these functions that I was talking about, the enterprise architecture function, are already embedded in some of the strategy and corporate development and other functions. So it's not easy to disrupt those and make a change and bring them together and leverage an architecture function. So it's a culture issue, it's an awareness issue, and it's an organizational issue as well.
Got it. Got it. So there's a multi-part kind of piece there. And so, let's then dive into, I think, some of the common themes I've heard. Obviously, you talk about, but also architects in general, and I think most healthcare companies are struggling with. And I'll start with the data question first. And if I may go ahead and say this, I don't think there's a single large healthcare organization in the country right now, and above a certain size that isn't struggling with data, like actually putting data to work. I was just on a conversation with a Blues Health Plan right before this, 30 minutes before this, and they were like, "Yeah, we've been trying to build this, customer data platform for years now." And so I think there's like the complexity in building a better understanding, a unified understanding of members is a universal problem across healthcare. And I think you're particularly equipped to talk about the solutions here, given for everybody listening the scale that Teladoc has in the digital and virtual care space, right? So it's $2.5 billion revenue company, 30 countries, 80 million members, so very large scale, right? And something that many other companies aspire to grow into in the future. And so, from your vantage point, Bhagirathi, talk to us about why is there such a persistent data understanding problem across all these healthcare organizations, and then what are some of the lessons you've learned in your journey that allow organizations to go from trying to bring data to sort of power the AI or the clinical use cases downstream, into sort of a place that's sort of where they're really empowered, where things really work out of the box. Like what are some of the lessons here, and what are the solution kind of levers look like? Can you talk about that whole area?
Sure. This is a very interesting topic of mine because this is something that I've been pondering on for a while now. And
Yeah.
then I went back to my BFSI roots to find some analogies. When somebody told me, data is the new currency right now, which is very true, right? If you think
Yeah.
about it that way, data is the new currency. And
Yeah.
if you keep liquid cash, yes, I want to keep my currency. But if you keep the currency as liquid cash, it's not healthy for the organization. You're not letting the money flow. And you're not investing in the right areas where your models, AI models, can consume and maximize results for you. And as a healthcare industry as a whole, you're not letting the money flow. You're not helping the economy, and you're not helping the overall healthcare industry in itself and its mission to bring the ecosystem closer together. But it's going to be interesting to see how it's a huge mindset change, right? So, and it's a tricky balance too. Health in healthcare industry, especially, when you think about your health consumers data, that is your asset, that is your currency, right? So yes, I would be open to mobilizing it within my company. I would be open to leveraging some of the large language models to, and then augment it with some of my clinicians to move some of the unstructured data to structure, label them, annotate them, curate them for the models to consume. But why would I, be, magnanimous to, let that also float around and share the data across other providers in the healthcare ecosystem? So that's an
Well, but there's all,
interesting.
and you couldn't even do that if you wanted to. In many cases, I mean, it isn't the right thing to do from a patient privacy perspective, right? So I think there's
Exactly.
like
So there are,
safeguards. Yeah, PHI.
exactly.
Before we do any of the altruistic use cases of more data and understanding consumers in healthcare, there's you have to start by protecting consumer privacy upfront.
There are privacy implications, there are legal implications as well. So that adds a lot more complexity to that as well, right? But from an architecture standpoint, my thought process is this, right? Within each of these companies, if they look at modern methods of leveraging the data that we have, right? You mentioned about Teladoc. We touch 80 plus million lives. Teladoc is in a way uniquely positioned to ride or lead the AI wave because of the richness and diversity of data it has, right? But that is going to require a lot of investment and time in curating the data, building the right data infrastructure to make the data consumable by these models, right? And that is not an insignificant amount of effort or investment that not just Teladoc, for any company. And
But why are healthcare companies? So sorry, I just want to unpack that. Right? Why are healthcare companies behind other industries in solving that problem? Like every industry is getting impacted by AI, right?
Mhm.
Before the current generative AI revolution, there was machine learning. So there's been this trend, I'd say, the last decade. But in your experience, when you compare it to like financial organizations, enterprise software companies, consumer tech companies, why are healthcare companies always behind?
Margin pressures, that is one, right? And investing in data, investing in AI,
Did you say margin pressures?
there are margin pressures because this is investing in data and AI. It's a huge
Hmm.
investment and it's a long game, right? Until you have this large language models and generative AIs, which is now open doors for much more quicker time to value and quicker
Yeah.
returns. Oftentimes, and this is the reason why I would say one of the contributing reasons for the so-called AI winter that we experienced the last 2 decades, right? In the AI winter, the companies that were able to progress significantly in the AI space are high-tech companies and software companies. Um, and it's not just healthcare companies, even in other industries that were very enthusiastic and optimistic about AI and investing in AI had to slow down because they were not seeing um, significant returns and they were not able to justify the investments that they wanted to make, right? So every company has that margin pressure. And every company, especially large scale companies, they have certain payback period. They have certain financial models where they have a stipulated payback period and return on investment and all that. So I don't think, even now we're not at a point where we can say this is the return on investment we are going to get. Some of the generative AI content generation, large language models, it's a different story, right? But the predictive models, your conventional machine learning models, that is going to require a lot of data curation and investment in data infrastructures. It's a long game. And for the long game, how will you justify the return on investment? How will you justify the quicker time to value and the margin pressures that the healthcare industry in general is going through?
Got it. Got it. So there is an economic margin, investment incentive, and that makes sense because a lot of healthcare is still a service industry, right? In the sense that you have humans providing care for the
Yeah.
most part of healthcare, right? And so the margin, the
But if I
reimbursement
may
model
add,
differ. Yeah.
to that, and also that is the economic side of the challenge, right? But there is also, other problems like up until the large language models, it's the technology challenge, right? The AI up until the LLMs was required a a niche group of your data scientists, your data teams. In addition to the margin and economic
Yeah.
related stuff, I think the bigger part of the problem was not as democratized the machine learning models as the current large language models are today, right? You had to invest in hiring data scientists, your
Right.
skilled resources who had specialization in data. But now with generative AI and the large language models, it's much more democratized. So it's the accessibility and people who can leverage AI, it has broadened. So things would change now. In addition to these two, the people and the investment related challenges. There are also challenges around, how the privacy. We spoke about the legal issue and the privacy issues. That's also a major, I would say, roadblock in, especially in the healthcare industry, which can explain why, in healthcare industry especially, it's taken such a long time for it to catch up with the rest of the industries.
Got it. Got it. Okay, super helpful. And so we spoke a lot about the data side of it. You spoke about the margin, you spoke about the regulatory side, the ability or inability to invest in technology, before everything else. Now let's talk about a couple of times you've hinted that things are changing with AI, right? You've
Mhm.
kind of so talk to me more about where you see the shift, what has changed, what does that mean for the deployment of AI use cases inside healthcare organizations from your vantage point as an architect looking at the entire business? What do you think is easier today that wasn't easier before with the advances in generative AI?
See, as an architect and as a technology advocate who's used to ingesting and adopting technology at scale, there are like three thumb rules that I normally use, and those are, in my mind, are key success factors for scaling any new technology like AI: minimalism, holism, and forethought. Right? If you're able to architect with minimalism, quicker time to value, if you're able to chunk it and show quicker returns, not just quicker and faster products, but quicker returns both from a business sense as well as from a customer experience standpoint. And if you're able to chain that as a part of, a larger mission of yours for the company, that's the holism, right? And in a way that it is not adding to your operational risk, and not creating a burden for your operational efficiency, but enabling your operational efficiency and reducing or containing your operational risk. These are the core principles for an efficient and sustainable scaling, right? With large language models, you're able to do that. How so? Because there are a lot of companies, I'm pretty sure you're aware, that now come as a startup companies to say, Layer Health is one example. They don't require you to have these huge volumes of data. They can, with their product, they're able to, augment with their own product. There are a lot of startups like that, which are able to, provide an LLM augmentation to your clinicians and other providers, who will be able to review the data, annotate the data, label the data, that will help build a training data set for your model. So that is a game changer in my mind, right? So that game changer, if you think about it, will help you to architect minimalistic, value, quicker time to value driven results, which can create a tailwind that you can build upon for the holistic big picture that you want to build, and create like a snowball effect. And that will also help you position for your next horizon. So that is, in my mind, is a huge game changer. And we have seen it, not just in healthcare industry, but healthcare industry, we are seeing a more profound impact of it, with generative AI and the open AI technologies and large language models.
And Bhagit, I heard you say two things in there, and I think it's worth just calling those out because I think it's important for people listening to sort of appreciate those. And so the first is I heard the time to market or the time to proof points, time to evidence that this is the right investment is much shorter now, right? And so if it was a lot longer to prove out, we've got an AI use case, we're not sure if it's really going to save cost to improve clinical care. What I'm hearing you say is companies can now do that on a much shorter horizon, maybe months and not years, or maybe months, weeks and not quarters, like they were doing before for some of these use cases. And then the second thing that I think is implicit in what you said is like the appetite to buy off the shelf capabilities versus build everything in house is also changing, and that's because the tools are getting more democratized. Can you talk about that second part a little bit more? Is like, how is your, when you look at the AI use cases and say, 5 years ago versus today, your willingness to kind of build stuff in house as an enterprise architect, as a person setting the roadmap for not just the next year, but maybe the next 3 or 5 years, versus buy things off the shelf has changed. Is that right?
That's right. So now the possibilities have really expanded with so many technology companies also wanting to invest in healthcare industry, the big tech companies who are very aggressively wanting to partner with companies like Teladoc and a lot of other healthcare industries to co-build, co-innovate. And Teladoc has I'm pretty sure you would have seen in the news, um, has ventured into like a couple of those co-innovate and co-build opportunity with Microsoft. One in the area of reducing the cognitive burnout for the physicians with the ambient scribing with tax nuance, and the other in
Right.
the recent experimentation that we've been doing with Microsoft in the area of marketing and improving member engagement. Those are quicker time to value and quicker returns that you can visibly see, right? The more hyper personalized interventions that you send, the more hyper personalized marketing engagement newsletters you send, the more engaged your health consumers are. The more engaged health consumers are, the more they take charge of their healthcare journey, and they subscribe to our health coaching or the suggestions that we provide to them, right? It's very similar to your Netflix analogy, right? The Netflix knows me,
Yeah.
it gives me recommendation based on my viewing history, so I'm hooked to it, right? So when things are hyper personalized to my needs, and when AI is able to do that, I'm more inclined to utilize those services. Now, with the co-build, co-innovate opportunities, we are able to the learning curve that the healthcare industries typically have, it's much shortened because of these partnership. We um, as we co-innovate and co-build with these high-tech companies, we are also learning and upskilling and ramping up our technology workforce. So that's a win-win.
Yeah, so there's a lot more appetite, and it sounds like it's two part. I mean, obviously, from your lens as a healthcare executive, you're looking for partners today because of the tools, but also a lot of tech companies, including large ones like Microsoft, as well as I'm sure smaller ones, are willing to partner with healthcare organizations for use cases that weren't, obvious use cases a few years ago, right? And so when you think of the investment roadmap for AI and for what you can do with AI in today's era, in this day and age, you see that it's going to be, taking advantage of those industry trends as you think of like the next 3 5 years of investments that healthcare executives or technology leaders like yourselves are making across the industry.
Absolutely. And for a thriving, AI ecosystem for all healthcare companies and any industry for that matter, more so for healthcare companies because of the maturity level that we are in the digital transformation journey, and the steep learning curve that we have in the AI field. I always talk about a three-pronged approach, right? Rapidly educating ourselves. We at Teladoc have started innovation with AI seminar series where we bring in eminent speakers from the industry to keep ourselves inspired and educated with everything that is happening in the industry. That is the rapid education part and upscaling part, and the rapid experimentation by forming these fusion teams, business technology fusion teams, to ideate and come up with these use cases that are quicker time to value that we can gradually build upon. And the co-innovation with and building a partner ecosystem for co-innovating, which will also help with the other two prongs. So it's kind of a three-pronged approach to create this sustainable and scalable AI ecosystem. And that's working pretty well for many healthcare companies.
Well, that's a very optimistic note, Bagirathi, to end this podcast recording on. So thank you again. This is awesome. And for everybody listening, we've been talking to Bagirathi Narayanan, who's the chief architect of Teladoc Health, sharing her insights on not just the role of architecture and the importance of good architecture inside organizations, but also how companies approach both the data and AI challenges in this episode. So thank you, Bagirathi, for a fantastic discussion.
Thanks for having me, and pleasure talking to you.